Good morning, comrades. You are listening to Good Morning Comrade, HIV 102.3 in New Orleans. Jeff here on the show. We have a very special guest, old pal. We have Patrick Shepard on the show. Patrick is the author of the piece in The Agitator, It's Still DSA. What's up, my dude? How you doing?
Hey Jeff, long time no see. Thanks for inviting me on your show. I'm doing good. I'm living up in New York again these days,
Nice.
and yeah, wild times here. I don't know if you've been watching the news, but we have this mayor race on.
Oh,
It's
we got to
been a
talk about
lot of
that at least a
fun.
little bit. So,
Yeah,
so
we'll put a pin in that maybe for the end.
Yeah, and I like this, especially with all the drama that kind of dropped over the past 2 days, was very, very funny.
It's been a wild ride, especially if you're a New Year's politics
Yeah,
sicko. It's like Christmas and New Year's rolled into one.
yeah. Well, we'll save that for dessert. Let's eat our vegetables first. Patrick is the author of the piece "It's Still DSA" in The Agitator. He writes in the article, and I thought this was very funny. It's totally clear here that there was nothing good about being a leftist before 2015. It was a effing nightmare, actually. It was dreadful and hopeless period where the U.S. left had no penetration into the American political life. Leftists were defined by their totally inscrutable internal political conflicts and a self-destructive focus on political purity over power building. It goes on to say that essentially, the main sites of leftist congregation in the U.S. were brutally toxic online discussion forums and Facebook groups. And, just to sort of summarize the rest, we now have essentially an organization that is somewhat at least adjacent to the mainstream that has the ability to make impacts both in the sort of like political world and also in the kind of organizing world, building relationships with groups, organizing groups or unions or whatever. And I don't know, you want to talk about that? How DSA kind of went from where it was, which was sort of a book club in 2015 and before, to what it has become today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you part of my motivation for writing this piece is to me it's a little biographical.
Yeah.
Because this is like the arc I experienced in my involvement with the US left.
Mhm.
So maybe to understand where I'm coming from, I can talk about myself a little bit. Um but yeah, so I first of all, hey everybody, my name is Patrick Shepard. I'm by day I'm a union representative and negotiator, and uh, uh, I'm also a member of DSA. I've been a member since 2015. I'm a member of the Socialist Majority Caucus in DSA, which we can talk about a little bit. It is the caucus that the articles posted on the caucus's website in its blog.
Mhm.
But yeah,
And we'll
I
have a
live.
link to that, by the way, in on the show notes, just so that people if they want to read it, they can do so.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. But yeah, to maybe start at the start here. I grew up in Louisiana. I grew up in Baton Rouge, moved to Florida, and it was around 2008, 2007, 2008. I went to Tallahassee for college, and I would say I became some kind of organized socialist leftist. At the time, I called myself an anarchist in around 2008.
Yeah. Who
Um,
amongst us has not had at least a short anarchist period, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, especially in the South, I gotta say
Mhm.
it's a thing. There's just such a lack of penetration of like the institutional left in the South.
Yeah.
So it's like, where do you have to start? You have the basically like this all seems wrong. I need a complete rejection of everything. You get
Yeah,
into it through culture, you get into it through music,
yeah.
through history. And if you read, Wikipedia articles and become infatuated with the Spanish Civil War like I did, then anarchism or anarcho-syndicalism, okay, this seems like the
This is
answer.
the
So I
way.
think like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good like on ramp, I think, starting place because people move towards what they have access to as far as ideas.
Mhm.
But so that's kind of where I started. In Tallahassee, I became an organized socialist. Um, got very involved and started to lead a campus group on FSU's campus called the Center for Participant Education, which was kind of like the radical left wing student union at FSU. At the time, this organization was absolutely circling the drain. It was like on its way out. Myself and a dear friend of mine who is at this time had a similar trajectory as me, but instead of going to the Wikipedia articles about the Spanish Civil War, he went to the Wikipedia articles about Lenin. Uh, so we had the anarchist and the Marxist Leninist, 18-year-old kids. We
Best friends.
best friends, endlessly bickering, but with much love.
Yeah.
We
Many
we
such
kind of took
cases.
many such cases. So we kind of took over this organization on FSU's campus, and it grew. And we found a lot of um, purchase, and we were very successful in kind of revitalizing it. And I'll tell you the difference that we made. We recognized early on that the problem with the culture of campus leftism or leftism in general at that time was so focused on lifestyle politics
Mhm.
and identity politics, to the point where it was much more of a club, like an insular club around culture, than it was any kind of discernible political organization.
Mhm.
The people who were in charge at the time basically had the attitude is you must ride a bike. And if anyone remembers the mid late 2000s, many such cases, you must ride a bike and be vegan or F you.
Yeah.
Was like the culture. This is just it's self-defeating. So
Mhm.
we had a lot of success in refocusing the activities of the organization on very practical political education, answering people's questions about organizing and power at the state level, challenging budget cuts, talking about austerity. This is also happening simultaneously with the 2008 financial collapse.
Mhm.
So a lot of people who even just before then weren't really thinking about politics all of a sudden found themselves with their prospects in the future drying up, their current situation taking a nosedive,
Mhm.
and politics becomes very relevant very quickly.
Yeah.
But again, this problem, nobody in that place in time had the language to articulate like an organized party building, power building leftist perspective. The other thing I want to say, take away from those times is being radicalized and joining like the proper left. We did a lot of traveling. We brought from Tallahassee like 20 people to the US Social Forum in Detroit at one point. We went to all these DNC and RNC protests, these like event style things. The protests that happen every year at Fort Benning in Georgia, School of the
Mhm.
Americas protests. We went to all these. And at that time, especially the kind of the immediate joining at that time, the immediate feeling you get is it felt like The Sopranos all the time. You got in at the end of something. You know?
Yeah.
You're just haunted by like a former grandeur of what was
Yeah.
able to be organized, and you're kind of living in the ashes. Like really.
Living in the ruins of Rome or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. You're like one of those late emperors of Rome when they had like 3 or 4 a year, and you're like,
Yeah.
you know.
When the Goths or whatever come in, they're like, "You know what? We're not even gonna kill you. We're just gonna, like, tell you to leave."
Yeah, the Praetorian Guard just, like, appoints a new one, whatever.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember one time with this organization that we took over, We opened up a closet on campus that we didn't even know we had. This at a time where our general meetings would be like 3, 4, 5 people. We opened up a closet and we found banners that were big enough to cross the entire, 4-lane street up to the Capitol.
Mhm.
And it's like, we don't even know enough people interested in these politics to hold this thing. And this was like
Yeah,
deployed at some point, and it was deployed during the anti-Iraq war protest era,
yeah.
which,
Which was a
back
major surge. Yeah,
which was a major surge, but also the collapse of that moment also brought with it into the vortex so much left organizational capacity.
yeah,
Organizations closed, like, it was really, I don't know, it's like an extinction level event if you look at the fossil record of leftist
yeah,
movements. So, by the time I got there in 2008, the collapse had already occurred, and this is kind of the world we were living in.
yeah.
Um,
And then
so
we get from there, not to jump ahead too much, we get an object lesson, I think, when it comes to things like Occupy Wall Street, of what a moment can make possible on the upside, and then also on the downside, the inability of that moment to, you didn't really have anybody that was up to the task of
right,
taking the lead. It was almost like it was the perfect project in a lot of ways. Occupy Wall Street, I mean, the product, rather, I guess I could say, of that era of leftism, or socialism, or it's not even necessarily that. Just this complete incoherent and structureless, complete incoherent and sort of structureless moment where people sort of had this somewhat of a consciousness, or at least a recognition that something is wrong and somebody's got to do something, and the rest of it, oh, let's just go to this freaking park or whatever, and that's the whole deal,
right,
you know. And I'm not trying to
absolutely,
be, provocative or nasty. That was a moment that I sort of like, oh, okay, people are actually going to do something here. And in the pity of it all is that there was no actual, there was no object or instrument to aim that at the strategic target. It was just a very sloppy kind of like bomb.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, to understand how the left in the U.S., like, such that it was interacted with Occupy Wall Street, you can understand what was going on. And I mentioned this in the article. The main points, the main kind of places where the left in the US kind of cohered, like, self-identified itself, like, had conversations. Um, it was in Facebook groups at the time and online forums. If anyone remembers leftforum.com, it is a nightmare place. Like, all the, like, early or late odds, forum culture,
Mhm.
except with people with different leftist tendency avatars, just being as cruel as possible to each other,
A
day in and
tradition
day
that
out.
lives on today, by the way, on places
Yeah.
like Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, it does. But, it was relegated to these kind of online forums. Every once in a while, there'd be kind of like a moment that occurs. Everyone kind of throws their hat in the ring to be like, either we caused this, or we got to get in there and kind of co-opt this and push them toward our line, was kind of the orientation to these things. Now, Occupy Wall Street was interesting, because no one was able to do that.
Mhm.
Kind of the formlessness I think a lot of people saw was the point. I
Yeah.
think this came from a couple places. It came from, people were still very preoccupied with the like, consensus anarchist
The
models that were
upwinkles.
very, yeah, 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 the spirit fingers and all that. Well, I was too. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm not calling anybody out. So
Everything that we say about anybody else is, we can definitely sort of apply to our own selves. You know what I
absolutely.
mean? In a lot of these situations.
Look, when I got to Occupy Wall Street, I was seen as like an elder statesman because, like, I had a lot of experience in the consensus decision making process
Are you
because
like 22 years old or something?
I was 21. But yeah, so it's like, this is where we were at the time. But, and then on top of that, there's this commitment to formlessness. There's this commitment to like the action is the message. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people tried to steer and direct it. It didn't really work. But it was just kind of like a place for experimentation. I think people found
Mhm.
a lot of things. I think they found that that model of large group consensus decision making is a nightmare. No basis for a
Yeah.
mass movement. I'm sorry. We all, I'm sure, have our own horror stories about how that worked out. Um, and also, it taught us. I think the big takeaway for a lot of people is that there is a constituency in the U.S. for the message of the left. Like
Mhm.
people are there; they're ready to hear it. They want answers that only we can provide. I think part of the form of Occupy Wall Street was also informed by the experience, like the cycles of uprisings in Greece that would, all the protest videos. If you're like a young radical watching the protest videos out of Exarchia,
Mhm.
was very thrilling, and like the
Also, the Arab
uprisings around
Spring too.
the Arab Spring.
Mhm.
But certainly, there's this question that everyone was asking at the time is like, okay, we're seeing a worldwide wave of austerity in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and then we're seeing a worldwide left upswing in response to those and movements against austerity. When is it going to come to the U.S.?
Mhm.
So it did. It came in the form of Occupy Wall Street. But as you say, there was no like instrument for it to cohere around.
Mhm.
But it did teach us that, listen, before Occupy Wall Street, no one had really in the current like living memory of leftists since like the WTO era,
Mhm.
um, had been a part of like a mass movement moment, really.
Mhm.
Um, so I think the conclusion amongst a lot of people before Occupy Wall Street was that there's just not a constituency in the US. Maybe, if you win, it'll have to be, very like secretly in a
Mhm.
way. I mean, people called themselves leftists, but I think it was a basically taken for granted that anyone who called themselves a socialist could never win
Mhm.
electoral office in the US because A, the capitalists power over the process was just so great you could never break through, and B, the term socialist, the identifier socialist, is just so maligned in this
Mhm.
country
Oh yeah.
because of like bad history and stupidity and attacks by fascists, that there's just no way to break through. But again, Occupy Wall Street shows like, oh wait, there is like a constituency for this.
Mhm.
Francis Fox Piven said, when asked like, okay, like how are we going to tell if Occupy Wall Street was a success or not, or do you think it was a success? He answered that, well, we won't really know for 5 or 10 years. And
Mhm.
she said that
Yeah.
at the time. She said that in 2011 or 2012. And
Mhm.
I can tell you exactly what happened. The other big victory from Occupy Wall Street, people who showed up, um, a lot of, especially in New York, this happened elsewhere to some degree. Veteran labor organizers showed up to these protests. Um, and there was a lot of like identifying and kind of cohering amongst people who were smart, mass movement minded, and really interested in building power, especially power through organized labor.
Mhm.
I can almost guarantee you that, just about any union organizer, union representative who got their start between like 2011 and 2013 somehow found their way to the labor movement via Occupy Wall Street, either, making contacts with a labor organization that was supporting the protests or meeting people or getting involved in, IWW stuff that would eventually get involved with, other local labor activities.
Mhm.
To the point where, and we'll bring it back around. I was living in New York City at the time. By 2015, the people who were kind of radicalized into like left labor politics had really come to the point they can kind of stand on their own.
Mhm.
So in New York. where I was living. I had been up until this point a part of a bunch of different left organizations. I'm not trying to call anybody out on drama. So, I as a bunch of them. I kind of I tasted a little bit from each pot on this. But I was kind of a free agent around 2015, and this was also when um a big cohort of left labor activists who had become union agitators, union organizers, very involved, um, kind of began to cohere. Almost all of them veterans of Occupy Wall Street, where they all kind of met each other, and the ideas cohered, and
Mhm.
this kind of laboratory of ideas produced the very particular notion of building mass movement power. And around 2015, there was two key events that happened that are actually very related. In the moment, it was the Verizon strike in summer of 2016, as actually after 2015, but summer of 2016, the Verizon strike, which kind of brought a whole lot of very talented labor organizers into the fold, and the launch of the Bernie campaign. Now, I was aware of Bernie Sanders. He was always just before 2015 seen as like this anomaly.
Yeah.
This guy
Yeah. The
who,
one guy who could call himself a socialist.
the one socialist grandpa. Yeah. If you're a leftist before, yeah, if you're a leftist now, there's always the one like socialist elder who shows up and is like, well, and you're like, wow, you're awesome. I wish there was more of you. But and that was Bernie for Congress. He was just the holdout, the guy who's doing it for so long, built him a tremendous
Keeping
amount
the
of
flame
credibility.
alive.
Yeah. And finally the rest of the world caught up to him. So, his campaign started, nobody gave it a chance. His campaign started in 2015. Nobody gave it a chance. And again, I think we were all still affected by this idea that if you call yourself a socialist, you can't win formal power. Like the ground is too polluted. Like you're too prevented from having any purchase. People's idea of what a socialist is they're just so infected by lies and history that is unfairly maligned, etc. And then Bernie just broke through all that.
Yeah.
It's like one of those answers that like, oh, it's obvious once you do it.
Yeah.
Like, once he did it, it was like, oh, like clear as day. You can just ask for all the stuff that socialists want. You can call yourself a socialist. You can, but put it into terms that people understand to make demands that are immensely popular. Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage, etc. So it was kind of this perfect storm where there was a across the country uh, group of people who kind of cohort of labor organizers. This didn't just happen in New York; it happened in every city. Cohort of labor organizers who had become politicized through Occupy Wall Street, had had some time to build experience and skill, and then the Bernie campaign hit. So now you have all these people like on the street engaging in mass political mobilization, and it took off. It was like a proof positive on the concept. Um,
Yeah.
so that this is what we found. Um, yeah.
Just to sort of like sum up a lot of this stuff too, like we have this overlying sense that actual concrete power building politics in a structural form from a left perspective is impossible. Then we have evidence, at least for the analysis of the class analysis or at least the antagonism of the ruling class against normal people with Occupy Wall Street, and then we get an affirmative case study of the possibility of a viable campaign that nobody gave a chance, um, being extremely successful in 2015, 2016 rather. And so now we're essentially sort of seeing that there are possibilities that are coming. And then really, I don't know how this happened, but there was somehow a conversion of a lot of the sort of kind of key core supporters of the Sanders campaign in 2016 to DSA becoming the sort of the vehicle, I guess, to go after that. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple. I'll say DSA's meteoric rise came from a couple places. And I don't want any of this to sound like I'm like talking bad about movement elders. Like my opinion about people who've been doing this much longer than I have is like we would be nowhere without
Yeah.
them. We wouldn't like we've been,
If you
you
can't
know,
keep the flame alive during the darkest of
exactly.
times, it goes out.
They kept the candle lit. They
Yeah.
gave us the tools to build a bigger thing.
Mhm.
Many of us would have never gotten off the couch if we didn't have, people keeping things going in the lean years. But the reality is every left organization in the country was like a mess, very, very small, very, very insular. DSA, again, very small, but I think the advantages of DSA, we had a group of people who were early adopters or who had been members for a long time. Um, and for them, I think part of it is just they lucked out with name recognition. Democratic Socialists of America. Bernie called himself a Democratic Socialist. Well, there you
Boom.
go.
Boom.
If I like
Brand
Bernie, I like
brand
this group.
brand identity paying
Yeah.
off on the front end.
Right. There was a group of especially like younger, a bit more, especially on international questions, like a bit more, I don't know, the left-right dichotomy within a group
Mhm.
that's already left is like fraught, but
Yeah.
left on international questions. This
Oh
was the
my
group that
god.
was like pushing for DSA to leave the Socialist International.
Mhm.
And this group was very inspired by Corbyn's movement in the UK. One of the early DSA proto caucuses was called Momentum,
Yeah.
which is also the name of the faction, Jeremy Corbyn's faction within the UK Labour Party.
Mhm.
That's not a mistake.
Oh,
So
okay.
there was a group kind of agitating for DSA to adopt a different orientation, more internationalism, more mass movement building, convinced that they could do it. So, the track was being set there. I joined at the 2015 Christmas party in New York, which was like a very nice little shindig. There were, I don't know, maybe a couple dozen people there at the New York office for DSA, and I joined because I knew a couple excellent, excellent labor organizers. Part of the cohort I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
Occupy Wall Street, radicalized people who got into the labor movement through Occupy Wall Street, then joined DSA because they saw it as a place to build. This small group recruited me. I recruited others. By the time the Verizon strike hit, I think a lot of people kind of got together and was like, we need an organization to coordinate through. And the
Mhm.
pick was DSA. It was not doctrinaire,
Mhm.
not dogmatic, not a big tent. Draw a line there. We could talk about what that means. I think a lot of people call it a big tent, but I think I would lovingly push back on that. Um, and no real litmus test for membership except broad agreement with our ideals,
Yeah.
and very easy to join. You pay dues through the website. If you're a dues paying member, you can vote and you're a member of the organization. um so it was kind of set up to catch the energy that came from the Bernie campaign. I joined in 2015. A lot of people who are really key early organizers within the organization joined in the summer of 2016. This labor group I talked about already. And then when Trump won, I think the idea then very broadly was not only was Bernie's strategy a uh uh you know a lesson in like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is possible. But after the mainstream Democrats lost to a fascist, then the opinion became, oh my God, Bernie's strategy is actually the only way we can save ourselves from the abyss. So then we saw this big explosion. The 2016, 1 year after I joined, a couple dozen people at the Christmas party. The next year, 2016, that Christmas party had about 500 people at it. It was, I bartended. It was
Oh,
crazy. I think a
oh,
lot of that was
yeah,
people
it's a
drinking
good tip
away
night,
Trump vote.
right?
It was a great tip night, all back to the organization. But
Good.
no, I think the bar alone raised like $4,500 that
Nice.
went into a really organizing coffers.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah.
Let's pause right there really quick because it's the bottom of the hour and we need to do station identification. You are listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Jeff and Patrick Shepard on the show. We are talking about his experience with the organization of DSA and through his sort of journey through the left from his time in college to now. And we were just leaving off at the huge Christmas party from DSA from 2000, I guess 17. Huh?
Yeah. Oh, that was Christmas 2016,
Oh yeah, right. Oh, so a month after, not
right
a year
after
after.
the
Okay, I beg your
election.
pardon.
Yeah. So people were really in the mood to drink.
Yeah,
Um,
no, yeah, of course. I
yeah.
was for sure as well. Considering, God, I don't want to get into 2016 campaign, but like you mentioned, how much of a failure that was, and just sort of like experiencing that in that moment. If you weren't there and you didn't see it, I mean, honestly, and this might be a little bit provocative to liberals or whatever, but like it was very, very similar. Hit a lot of those exact same notes as the 2024 Kamala
Yeah.
Harris campaign. Just this complete, fingers in your ears, not even just like uh unwillingness to operate or communicate with any kind of criticism that didn't come from like the Cheneys or something like that, but
Yeah.
also like this sort of contempt, this idea that if you don't get in line, if you don't do the thing, this is your fault. And
It's
that is sort of
inevitability.
the
Yeah.
perfect way to get people to just put their middle finger up at you and be like, even if they don't, even if they don't go and like support the other side, or they might go vote. And I'm not even advocating for this. I'm
Yeah.
not even saying to do this, but like like 2024 liberalism, and it's been like this for several decades. It has been not a object of we need to build something up that people actually want to do. It is get in the car or we will kill you. That's like what
Yeah.
the program is. Or we won't kill you. The demons at the gates will kill you. The
Yeah.
barbarians at the gates will kill you. And that's the sort of perspective that they constantly put forward. I mean, much to, again, that's in a lot of ways, that is a good opposition to have, because nobody likes that stuff.
And there's a component of it too, where okay, I mean, like from like the movement perspective, it's like okay, the mainstream Democratic Party, evil for a lot of reasons,
Yeah.
corporate party, pro-war party, etc. Which we can talk about the formation of parties in the U.S. It's more
Oh yeah.
complicated than just calling it the Democratic Party. In my opinion, the U.S. doesn't have political parties. It has uh, one
Political
state.
brands,
It has
essentially.
two state-sanctioned ballot
Yeah.
lines, and then kind of broad coalitions that formulate around those two ballot lines. But
Yeah.
we don't have political parties. They're actually illegal in this country.
Mhm.
Um, but okay, putting that aside, there's this component where they have one job, which is all their other sins. They have one job. They keep the fascists out of office.
Yeah.
There's their one job. They failed at it. The other thing
Twice.
that they twice in both times. And then the other thing that a lot of these like centrist corporate Democrats taught us is that they would much, much rather lose to the Republicans on their terms than win and beat the Republicans on our terms. Is obvious, like it's coming out more and more, and I think
So this is happening like 3 days after there was this sort of like political get together organized by a bunch of billionaires, including like Alyssa Slotkin and Camp Perez and Matt Iglesias, who was like a keynote speaker, and Richie Torres, and all these freaks. And they're basically doing like, okay, how do we rebrand? They didn't put it in these terms, but I watched some of the stuff because I'm a sicko. How do we rebrand this same like warmed over sort of like supply side BS that we've always done? And how do we just after we've gotten crushed by running this whole thing twice, how do we reset it and make it so that people buy the same BS? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that's the welcome fest.
Yeah. Oh my god,
I
it was so. I watched. I am such a sicko. I love watching those things.
I've been protecting my beautiful brain from any of those videos so
Oh,
far, but
mine's already fucking warmed up. It's all good.
um so I mean, yeah, this is what they taught us again. Like they would much rather lose to the Republicans on their terms than win on our terms. Um and yeah. So where were we?
We were at the sort of like, we were talking about the Democrats and we were talking about
Yeah.
sort of like post
Okay.
2017 and the sort of like the way that essentially DSA cast the broad net and caught a bunch of members.
So here's the next key thing I think that happened. And this is like summer well, it was right after the Trump election. So,
Mhm,
into 2017. Um I was a part of a group, the first kind of basic structure and thoughts and objectives of early DSA specific electoral organizing in New York. I wrote like my original thoughts about things on a cocktail napkin, getting drunk after the Trump victory, just furiously thinking and writing things down. I think a lot of people were in meetings like that
mhm,
after this. But what would happen is that there was other like attempts at small socialist power building, electoral power building efforts in New York City before that. But we made some plans, had some meetings, and those groups kind of formally disbanded and recohered under DSA.
mhm,
So we saw a lot of people who are like, we want to run a city council member who's a socialist, and in an area we think we can actually win. We haven't won any of these yet. It'll still be proof of concept to have someone who calls themselves a socialist and be a movement candidate, win a local election with small dollar donations driven by a volunteer mass mobilization campaign. Um, so we recohered under DSA, formed our like electoral working group in New York, and then started our first efforts. And then it would be the next year. Rewind real quick. Some of our objectives early on are that we need to build our own infrastructure. This is something that we learned through Bernie. We need our own lists. We need our own turnout capabilities. We need to not rely on consultants. So much of the maladies of the Democratic Party are directly, tied back to the super reliance on consultants. It's a multi-billion dollar industry of
for the
consultants
dumbest
who
ideas imaginable too.
dumbest
It's
ideas
incredible.
imaginable. Also, these people gatekeep the very practical skills that you need. Are we back?
Yeah, we're back. I'm sorry. You were talking about gatekeeping.
Okay. Also, they're gatekeepers. This consulting class, they when you run an election, you need a whole lot of like skills. You need knowledge about how to run a treasury, knowledge about how to file periodic reports, knowledge of how to get petitions signed. And traditionally, it's this consulting class that has gate kept those skills. Now, another thing that happened during the first Bernie campaign is those skills got disseminated across
Mhm,
the country to a whole lot of people who didn't have access to them before because they got involved. Not only did they get involved, they got involved deeply as an organizer on that initial campaign. So they took those skills and they brought them back. That combined with some new technologies, Van.
mhm,
Before Van, it was much more difficult for an upstart insurgent campaign to, get the voter file, parse it in some meaningful way,
mhm,
cut lists and door knock based on that. That kind of takes an operation. Van allows you to just do it.
mhm.
right? So if you know how to use the program, same thing with Act Blue. Act Blue came out and said, okay, well, you used to have someone who's basically a professional accountant to do all this stuff and be the treasurer on your political campaign. Now, you have an app that does most of the work for you. Like I was the campaign
Mhm.
treasurer on a successful state Senate campaign because of Van. Or I'm sorry, because of Act Blue. It's like really not very difficult. So our objectives
A little bit
early
of
on were
both,
to,
honestly.
yeah, our objectives early on were to build these skills locally in our local organization, our apparatus, skills that were jealously guarded by the consulting class before this. So build these skills so that we can run these campaigns, and do our own list keeping and data keeping and build our own lists and have our own data management, have our own electoral resources that's just for the left,
Yeah.
right?
And
Um,
along with that gatekeeping, because they're holding these keys, these important keys, they would also, I mean, like they still exist in places like Louisiana. You have these freakazoids who are just like these high level, high profile consultants, and they're just like trying to be tastemakers at the same time. It's
yeah.
really kind of crazy how that works.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Worst people
there's
in the world with the worst opinions in the world, and it's just like,
yeah,
man, if you weren't a relic of like previous generations, and if you weren't a, just like one of these just people that only knew how to do these very specific things, like they're dinosaurs, but they still maintain some level of sort of like political prestige because our political system is so slow to adapt to these kinds of changes.
I mean, look, they still interview James Carville.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
anyone still people still care about what that guy has to say. He's like he's been professional at being wrong for 100% wrong every
It's the
time he opens his
90s.
mouth. He's still watched by it. Like anything he says, the opposite will happen. Like,
He's the
you know,
what's the guy's name? The guy that used to press all the buttons on the CNBC.
um,
All of this oh god. Anyway, that guy,
yeah,
but for politics.
yeah. Speaking of your consultant pundit class from Louisiana, like
Yeah.
James Carville.
James
Uh, w-
Garfield,
w-
Mary Patricia Ray, like all these complete
yeah.
freakazoids.
Complete freakazoids. Yeah, anyway, so okay, so we started building this apparatus and it started to pay dividends. And we
Yeah.
saw our first victories in 2018. And this is all like in New York. It happened elsewhere to varying degrees. There's success stories elsewhere, obviously. This is what I experienced in. We started winning in 2018. We broke through in the state Senate, and we broke through with AOC.
Mhm.
Which after AOC was elected, that was even bigger than the Bernie campaign.
Mhm.
Still the single biggest wave of people joining DSA in the history of the organization was the
Mhm.
day after AOC's victory, because again, people organize towards solutions, people mobilize towards solutions.
Yeah.
So if you can demonstrate that you can win something, people who are sympathetic to what you say now might join,
Mhm.
rather than just an endless critique of how everything else is wrong. But
Yeah, and then you get that proof of concept like we were talking about earlier, with AOC, with the, state senate, campaign as well. You also go on to get people, who are either DSA members themselves or DSA adjacent, like Rashida Tlaib, like Ilhan Omar, the people like that who, I mean, they might have their own different capacity with the organization, some closer than others, but they are definitely people that we've sort of aligned behind in a certain to one extent or another, and that's proof of concept that is not in New York City, which is also like extremely important
yeah,
because that's one of the other ways that they write off these political movements is because like, oh, that's coastal elite stuff,
yeah, right.
which is
I want to something I say to that very often is like you got to understand uh none of this was inevitable in New York City.
yeah, of course not.
I think there's
The
this
political
feeling
establishment
that
in New
like,
York City is like famously strong.
oh
It's
yeah,
just like
we had to kill like three political machines to get as far as like three political machines that have existed since Tammany Hall to
yes,
get this far. The political machine behind what's his name, who AOC beat in
Crowley.
yeah, Crowley, in the political machine in North Brooklyn, those were powerful,
Mhm.
long lasting. These are machines that people thought you just couldn't challenge. I was personally served papers by the New York Democratic Party. Uh, they tried to sue us off the ballot.
Mhm.
So like they tried, but whatever rot has happened in other places in American social life, make no mistake, it also has happened in these political machines that have held up centrist Democratic Party for decades and decades. They just couldn't pass the muster. And I'll tell you, when we started turning out people to knock doors. I think it was the weekend after AOC won because there was a gap between the congressional election and the state senate election that year. So AOC won the next weekend for the state senate. We had over 500 volunteers
Mhm.
show up to knock doors on a state senate campaign.
Yeah.
Now, most people in the New York political media class thought we were lying to them when we told them how many volunteers we had because like no one could comprehend that you could build a turnout machine like this, and
Yeah.
we had done it.
No,
So
you
it's
pay
like
canvassers. That's how you do it. You gotta pay canvassers.
100%, and that's and like I can't tell you how many times I've seen a paid canvasser wearing the free T-shirt that they gave them,
Mhm.
tell me that like I'm just passing these out for the rest of the day, but I'm gonna vote for your person anyways. Um, it's like what's the quality there? Like
Mhm.
it's non-existent versus someone who's like I'm a volunteer and I freaking believe in this.
Mhm.
The quality difference is really crazy.
Mhm.
But it's a secret sauce, and it's a blind spot that they had because real political organizing just hasn't existed in this country in a generation. Like it
Yeah,
just hasn't.
and you would think, and obviously, these media and, political class people are they don't understand it conceptually. It's kind of incredible, but like
Right.
there is a correlation, I guess you could say, between ability to recruit volunteers who are not paid and genuine support for an individual. like
Yeah.
you would think that would be sort of intuitive, but these people either willingly or not are just like, I don't get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the water they swim in. If you're
Yeah,
a person who's in the political pundit consulting class, everyone that you see on a day-to-day basis, every relationship that you have in this world is
transactional.
100%
Yeah,
transactional. Believes in anything. And the idea of believing in something is either seen as completely foreign, but also stupid. Well, why
mhm,
would you believe in that? Like, it'll be harder to get a job for someone you disagree with if you're so much of an ideologue. Like,
yeah,
don't you want to make money? Success is like, how, how many W's you can rack up. That's
yeah.
why you see so many people from that generation of who was his name? The Obama's campaign manager went over
Rahm
and worked for
Emanuel.
not Rahm Emanuel, the other guy.
Oh, Axelrod. You think of Axelrod.
Well, one of them went over and worked, as the campaign manager for Boris Johnson. Went over and
Oh.
worked for the Tories. It's like it's just
Okay.
they're guns for hire. They don't believe in anything.
Yeah,
So when you actually believe in something, you have a tool that can mobilize people because politics still like matter. You have a tool that you can mobilize people with that the other side just has no conception of, and it will always take them by surprise. This is why, like, they can't understand. However much you or however much you focus group test anything, it made no sense to them that a cranky grandpa would be seen as the sexiest politician in 50 years. Like, there's no way they could have anticipated that, but it's what he says.
yeah.
He has credibility. These things matter to people.
Jim Messina, that's the guy.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of move forward a little bit because I do want to talk about sort of the time after AOC, between AOC and now, and I really do want to talk about the Mandani campaign. So can we just sort of like go through there and sort of get to what's going happening in New York?
Yeah, this might tie it back into the piece that I wrote. So this thing has happened in DSA, and this hasn't been. I know I'm building this narrative that it's just been a straight line up and up.
No,
Like, all
it's
of
been
history
very,
has a
very
lot.
much the hard way. We're going through the woods here.
Yeah, the only way out is through, buddy. But, and it hasn't been. There's steps backward, there's steps forward, and I think a thing has happened even within DSA. And I know a lot of people's, maybe I'm speaking directly to your audience now. I think a lot of people's interaction with DSA has mostly been through, excuse me, through interacting with really annoying people on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if I've ever been that annoying person. I should probably just not tweet, but
Thank you for apologizing.
but
I'm kidding. I love you, big guy.
aw, I love you too, Jeff. Um, but this thing has happened within DSA that I think, people joined. It's a completely different radicalizing trajectory than I took than people who were around before, 2015 or before 2010 took. A lot of people have joined DSA and have looked for a way to very quickly transcend this focus, they would say, on electoral politics. I would say focus on organization building and practical power building through a strategy of running on the democratic line where it makes sense to putting socialists into office with real power and building a movement behind it. But there's been a fixation on, like, oh, that's too focused on electoral politics. We need to move on to something else. And then a lot of that within DSA has kind of reverted to the left political orientations and relationships that existed before 2015, before we even had a seat, before
Right.
we had anything. We
Yeah.
had any organizational apparatus, we had any footholds in formal power, before we had any of these, like, victories that have completely changed the game. Like, because our organization has been able to win seats, like, the US left is in a completely, like, materially, completely different place than it was before 2015. And I say this completely knowing that we are but a minor force in American politics. A minor force with, like, an insane upside, though, because our ideas and our politics and our way of approaching them have and we're seeing this in New York, have the ability to break through. And when it does, I'm reminded of the thing Pete Seeger would say.
Mhm.
It's one of my very favorite, like, organizing, mechanisms that he would talk about. And he would talk about how effective political organizing is like this. You walk down the road and you see a teeter totter, right? On one end of the teeter totter is a basket full of rocks. Okay, heavy. On the other end is a bucket with a bunch of holes in it, and people taking little teaspoon cups of sand
Mhm.
and put it in the other side. And the sand's leaking out, and the person walking down the road says, "Look, what? Like, why are you even bothering? The sand's going out as soon as it's going in. You're never going to outweigh the rocks on the other side of the teeter totter." But then one day you hit that critical mass with the little teaspoons of sand, and it goes whomp. The
Mhm.
sand bucket hits the ground, the rocks are up in the air, everything just turned over, and it leaves everyone saying, "This came out of nowhere. This is a
Mhm.
political earthquake. Who could have seen this coming?" All the people have been scooping the sand into the bucket at the other side, now have their hands on their knees, winded, like, "What do you mean? Like, we've been working on this so hard. I know where it came from."
Yeah,
And
this
and that
this this sort of spontaneous idea, that this spontaneous moment was years in the making, and so much blood, sweat, and tears went into it.
Yeah. Right. Right. But, to round back into the piece, I think there has been an issue in DSA where it's like, missing the long view about how far the strategy has brought us, how much further we can go with it, how further we must go with it. And there's been this kind of recreation of it's like the whole left that existed before 2015 now exists in, like, microcosm within
Yeah.
DSA.
Yeah,
It's very
the left forum, message boards are now just the DSA message boards.
Yeah, and it's crazy how similar they are, and it's the same arguments and
Mhm.
everything. So here's the appeal in the article. We know that there is this whole layer of principled leftists, people who are ideologically on the left, who believe in greater power for the 99%, who support unions, who support massive changes in society to take the focus of our government and our politics in our social sphere away from a focus on serving and supporting the billionaire class, and think that all of those resources and all of those institutions should focus on lifting up average people, working people. We know that there's this layer of people in the United States who think this way. We know a lot of them, what already self-identify as leftists. A lot of these people are already community organizers, already union organizers. So here's the appeal. Listen, DSA is the best vehicle that we have found. This is like
Mhm.
we talked about the road that twisted and turned and brought us here, but this is the best answer that we have to push forward the left in the United States today. And my appeal to those folks, if I just described you, join, join.
Mhm.
I'm part of my caucus. I would encourage you to check it out.
Mhm.
Obviously, you don't have to be in a caucus to join and participate in DSA, but the people who are a lot of the folks who are deeply involved in building up our project in New York City and elsewhere and winning these major victories are part of this caucus within the organization. That's one of the reasons I joined. You're encouraged to join. You're encouraged to talk to us, and as I say in the article, the answer hasn't changed. COVID made things crazy. The Democratic Party going full bore on supporting, aiding, abetting, and arming a genocide,
Yeah.
has thrown things into disarray. But don't let hopelessness creep up on you. Hopelessness is a tool of the oppressor. It is a tool of the
One of
ruling
their most
class.
effective tools, quite frankly.
Absolutely, it is. The best answer we have now to organize for working class power in this country, proven and still moving, and has a huge upside, huge amount of power we can get through this strategy. It's still DSA.
Mhm.
Like you're encouraged to join.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can sort of leave it there. Do you want to just say a quick word in the last 2 minutes about Zoran campaign? It's so exciting to see things that are happening right now. You're in New York City. Just really quickly, can you just kind of drop in a minute on that?
Yeah, I mean it's the energy is palpable. You
Yeah.
can't go anywhere without seeing Zoran signs. He's peaking, he's breaking through.
Yeah, I'm
And
really mad at you guys for getting my hopes up. You know what I mean? Like, why
yeah,
do you do this to me?
yeah,
Now
right.
you got
You're
to
doing it
deliver.
too. Yeah. Um, but again, this is like you can't again the Zoran campaign again, the long view, the a lot of people with the little teacups of sand. You got to understand this didn't come from nowhere. This is the culmination of about a decade
Mhm,
of hardcore on the ground organizing.
mhm.
This is organizing that has brought a socialist caucus to New York State politics.
Yep.
This is the organizing that has brought New York City Council members into City Hall here. This is the organizing that has done things like pass the Building Public Renewables Act that passed a resolution through the City Council officially condemning the U.S. blockade on Cuba,
Mhm.
that has made a viable left bloc in New York politics from the city to the state. And then the project that is now Zoran, is a member. Like in many ways, came up through the organization. Really an excellent, talented individual, and the people helping to run the campaign came up through this effort to take the ability to run campaigns away from the consulting class and put them in the hands of working class activists on the ground and organizers on the ground. And this is all coming to a head right now. Again, this didn't come from nowhere. People
Cool.
have been working, and not just DSA. DSA has been a part of this. It's been, my political home and DSA members. This has been a project that's been near and dear to them. But this has been a project that's been underway for over a decade now. And you know, let's see what happens.
Cool. Well, Patrick, Thank you so much, Patrick Shepard. You can follow him at Patrick T Shep on the social media. You can also on the Everything app, Twitch, Twitter, the Everything app. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show, Patrick. We're gonna have you back on sometime in the future, but really appreciate talking with you and always good seeing you. Thank you to everyone for listening to Good Morning Comrade. You can listen to us every Saturday at 10 a.m. on WHIV 102.3 FM. You can also listen to us anywhere in the world, WHIVFM.org/listen. All of our stuff's at our website, goodmorningcomrade.com, where you can find our RSS feed, podcasts, YouTube, and everything. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Jeff. This has been fun.
Yeah, always. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. This is WHIV 102.3 FN. We love you. Bye-bye.